everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to welcome you to part 2 of our webinar series. Last time we discussed public facility corporations. Today we will be focusing on housing finance corporations. I'm Esme Thoman, and this is my colleague, Carley Butler. We will be hosting the webinar.
Good morning. Esme and I are part of the Government and Regulatory Affairs group at Butler Snow. We're based in Austin. We assist our clients in utilizing public financing tools. And today, like she said, we will be discussing the Housing Finance Corporation tool.
Okay, let's get started. So in addition to the 100% property tax exemption for apartment complexes on leasehold interests granted by Public Facility Corporation, Texas provides 2 additional primary statutory mechanisms by which an affordable rental housing development can receive an exemption from ad valorem taxes. Number 1, the 50% exemption for rental housing owned by a qualified nonprofit, and the 100% exemption for apartment developments owned by a political subdivision and their instrumentalities, such as a housing finance corporation, which is today's topic. So what is a housing finance corporation? A housing finance corporation is a public, not-profit corporation organized under Section 394 of the Texas Local Government Code. And it's established by a sponsoring local government. It's exempt from ad valorem taxes. And an HFC is authorized to issue debt for the purpose of supporting affordable single-family home mortgages and providing financing for multifamily housing projects for low and moderate families. HFCs commonly provide tax-exempt mortgage revenue bonds and other support for the acquisition, construction, and rehabilitation of multifamily housing for individuals or families earning less than 60% or below area adjusted median income. A housing finance corporation is led by a board of directors that are appointed by the sponsoring local government, and a housing finance corporation can sponsor conventionally financed development projects where the public entity, or that HFC, is serving as the general partner of the limited partnership holding the leasehold interest in the property. Because of this structure, the property receives 100% tax exemption in exchange for offering affordable housing in the community. The property tax exemption allows the HFC to partner with developers and promote affordable housing in the communities they serve. And this graphic demonstrates how a partnership might work. A conventionally financed multifamily project partners with a local housing finance corporation. The HFC serves as the general partner of the limited partnership holding the leasehold interest in the property and receives 100% property tax exemption in exchange for offering affordable housing units. This tax exemption supports that economic development and really speaks to the mission of a housing finance corporation. So now I'll pass it off to Carley.
Okay, the Housing Finance Corporation's role in conventionally financed developments. There's 100% property tax exemption for conventionally financed projects. The Housing Finance Corporation sponsors conventionally financed development projects where the public entity, the HFC, is serving as the general partner of the limited partnership holding the leasehold interest in the property. The property receives 100% property tax exemption because the public entity, the HFC, is the general partner of the entity holding the leasehold interest. To qualify for this 100% exemption, a property must be both publicly owned and used for the public purpose, and providing affordable housing does serve as this public purpose. The HFC ownership structure does differ from a PFC structure. It's similar, but the differences are: in a PFC arrangement, a private developer controls the general partnership interest of the limited partnership with the leasehold interest in the property. In an HFC structure, the public entity, the HFC, controls the general partnership interest of the limited partnership with the leasehold interest in the property. In the PFC, the developer controls the GP interest as the slide depicts in this graph. And the HFC, the public entity, controls the GP interest of the limited partnership. Housing Finance Corporations, the 100% exemption for apartment developments owned by political subdivisions and their instrumentalities. In section 394.905 of the local government code, it exempts property owned by housing finance corporations created by counties and cities from property taxes. As we have covered, if a local government chooses 100% exemption is available for apartment developments as long as the property is owned by a political subdivision and their instrumentalities. Under section 11.11a of the tax code, the property owned by the state or political subdivision of the state is 100% exempt from property taxes as long as the property, like we said, is used for a public purpose. This exemption is authorized under the Texas Constitution, which authorizes the legislature to exempt from taxation public property used for public purposes. This is found in Article 8, Section 2A. For an HFC to qualify for this 100% exemption, a property must be both publicly owned and used for that public purpose. As the graphic illustrates, an HFC can sponsor conventionally financed development projects where the public entity, the HFC, serves as a general partner of the limited partnership holding the leasehold interest in the property. The property is eligible for 100% property tax exemption since the property is publicly owned and used for public purpose, like affordable housing, workforce housing, developments, etc. Housing Finance Corporation and utilization of the 100% property tax exemption. The HFC tool isn't new. It has been used less than the PFC structure, especially in the past few years. Local governments can utilize a Housing Finance Corporation, participate in conventionally financed housing development projects, and maintain control over the development while supporting their mission to provide affordable housing options to the community they serve. And I think that we should discuss the proliferation of the PFC tool. We covered the chapter 303 of the Texas local government code in our last webinar, and it governs public facility corporations. But as a quick refresher, in 2015, the Texas legislature changed to allow for a new opportunity for housing developers to receive 100% property tax exemption for developers by using the PFC structure, whereby the local government entity no longer controlled the development via general partnership interest. Because of those changes from 2015 until recently in 2023, a growing number of counties and cities utilize PFCs for conventionally financed multifamily affordable housing developments. The PFC arrangement allowed the private developer to maintain control over the general partnership. During this time period, the PFC structure was most commonly used, although there were still HFC deals being closed. Public Facility Corporation Statute Reform. In June of 2023, the legislature passed HB 2071, which updated Chapter 303 of the Local Government Code. The new legislation imposed additional restrictions to the PFC tool. Due to Chapter 303 updates, we expect the utilization of that specific tool to be changed.
And so if you're interested in hearing more about the Public Facilities Corporation, you should view our public facility webinar because we go in detail about all the changes in the reform that happened. But moving on, it's important to note that each HFC has their own set of requirements for development partnerships that fit the needs of the communities they serve. Two of the statutory requirements for conventionally financed projects and HFCs that we'll discuss today include, number one, the ownership structure and equitable ownership. So under 394 or Chapter 394, a property must be publicly owned. As for meeting the Texas Constitution's and state statutes public ownership requirement, the exemption provisions in Chapter 394, which apply to Housing Finance Corporation, do not provide guidance on what role a for-profit entity can play as an owner of a housing development in order for that property to still qualify for the 100% exemption. In instances where a public entity is not the sole owner of the property, Texas court rulings and an opinion from the Texas Attorney General provide that the property used for public purposes qualifies for an exemption as long as it is equitably owned by a public entity. So a for-profit entity that partners with an HFC to obtain that property tax exemption can meet the publicly owned requirement as long as the development is equitably owned by the public entity. That's the real big distinction with the Housing Finance Corporation structure. Equitable ownership means that the local government entity has the present right to compel legal title. And whether a property is equitably owned by a city or a county housing finance corporation is a fact-specific determination. The case law and attorney general guidance has been interpreted by industry stakeholders to support 100% exemption on apartments developed and owned through a public-private partnership when the following conditions exist. Number one, the land is owned in a fee simple by Housing Finance Corporation and leased for at least 50 years to the limited partnership. Number two, the improvements are owned by the limited partnership, but the public entity maintains control to compel transfer of legal title to the property. Number three, the public entity is the general partner of the limited partnership or owns at least 51% interest in the general partnership, while the investors and other for-profit partners are only limited partners. Number four, the public entity has the right of first refusal to acquire the property. And number five, the public entity has the right to cure financing defaults by the partnership. So diving in a little deeper into the public ownership requirement, Texas statutes do not provide much in the way of restrictions when it comes to limiting the incomes or rents that must be imposed on a publicly owned rental property to further the public purpose. And thus qualify for that 100% property and sales tax exemption. For city and county housing finance corporations to qualify for that 100% exemption, at least 90% of a residential development must be, quote, intended to be occupied by persons of low or moderate income, as that term is specifically defined in statute. It's important to note that most apartment complexes with that 100% property tax exemption are owned through partnerships with the city or county housing finance corporation are oftentimes receiving some other sort of public financing that includes either tax exempt bonds or low income housing tax credits. Of course, that's not always the case. There are examples in many across the state where you have housing finance corporations partnering with conventionally financed developments. And the mandates and requirements that we're talking about today are, for that example, for conventionally financed projects, but most oftentimes you will see housing finance corporations have partnerships with a development that has tax exempt bonds on them or LIHTC. So moving on. And this is a review of the things we've really already gone over, but equitable title is determined by having the public partner as the general partner of the lessee. And this gives that public partner control rights to the property or clawbacks to gain control of the land. Property used for public purposes qualifies for an exemption as long as it is equitably owned by that public entity. Equitable ownership means that the local government entity has present right to compel legal title. And a few general comments on equitable title and a summary of the things that we've discussed today is that for these conventionally financed projects, which are eligible for the 100% property tax exemption, the finance corporation must serve as the general partner in the entity holding the leasehold interest to the property. That's a real big distinction here. In contrast to the Public Facilities Corporation financing structure. The HFC tool allows for the ability of a property tax exemption without having to meet those other requirements that you see in Section 303 of the Local Government Code that has been reformed that applies to the PFCs that now have requirements such as more transparency, et cetera. I will note, though, that a lot of HFCs already have baked those changes in, meaning that each HFC across the state has their own requirements and things that they like to see so they can serve their community in the best way. And they've memorialized some of those changes that you've seen in Chapter 303 for Public Facilities Corporation, and they're already incorporating those, even though the statute really just requires that it be equitably owned and used for a public purpose. Equitable title, again, is determined by having that public partner as the GP of the lessee. The GP must control rights to the property or maintain the ability to control those rights. And the housing finance corporations, the ones that at least we've spoken to, are proceeding very cautiously, and they're being very deliberate about having the any PFC deals be completely separate, of course, from any HFC deals, because they don't want Chapter 394 to receive the negative attention that Chapter 303 has, because it's a really useful tool that local governments utilize as they develop workforce housing in their communities. And that's really all I have, but I just want to reiterate the fact that each housing finance corporation across the state is different. We've discussed the statutory requirements today and what they have to meet when they partner with conventionally financed projects. But each housing finance corporation is going to have a different set of requirements that fit the needs of the communities they serve.
I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today to discuss the Housing Finance Corporation tool. We appreciate your time and interest and look forward to the next webinar in this series. Before we go, I'd like to mention that Esme and I and the Butler Snow team help our clients navigate federal, state, and local incentives for multifamily development. If we could ever be of help, our information is up on the screen. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Bye, y'all.